Joining us now, NBC News Washington managing editor Carol Lee, who was part of the team to first report on this pardon. Also with us, Matt Viser, Washington Post White House reporter, Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney and senior FBI official, and Ankush Khardori, former federal prosecutor. So, Carol, you were part of the team that broke this news last night. How did the president go from never pardoning to blanket pardoning?
Well, according to our reporting, Jose, the president actually never really took this idea of pardoning his son off the table, despite publicly saying that he would not do so. What we were told is that in June, after Hunter Biden was convicted on gun charges, there were discussions about this, and the decision was made to publicly message that the president would not pardon his son, even though it hadn't been fully ruled out, and the idea was still very much an active possibility. Now, what happened in the last few weeks is obviously former President Trump, now President-elect Trump, got elected. That raised concerns that potentially Hunter Biden could be targeted, and to use the president's words, in a new Trump administration. And so that it largely became inevitable that this is something that the president would do. And now we heard from the president in that statement where he talked about this and said that he believes that politics played a significant role in what his son was facing. He said that it had infected the process and led to a miscarriage of justice. And he said to the American people that I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision. So far, Jose, we've seen mixed reactions, criticism, obviously, from Republicans, but also some Democrats. And yet the president this was something that he and the family discussed. He made the final decision over the weekend. And now Hunter Biden has a pretty broad pardon.
Yeah, I mean, Carol, what was the calculation inside the White House about the sweeping nature of this pardon? Something we haven't seen since, well, decades.
Well, it's a great question, and I think the question is whether that piece of this has to do with the fact that we have a President-elect Trump and those concerns that once there was a new Trump administration, could that administration launch new investigations into Hunter Biden? And so this decision to cover this nearly a decade-long period where Hunter Biden cannot be investigated or charged with anything that he may or may not have done during that time frame, that really takes care of that in that sense. And look, the fact that, Jose, this has happened before Hunter Biden's sentencing, which was scheduled to happen in just days from now, in his gun charges trial, and then the plea on tax evasion charges. That means that Hunter Biden also, what the president did here, he doesn't have to go through those proceedings. So there's still a lot of questions here. I'm sure a lot of people will be asking them, but this is something that is very, very broad.
Carol Lee, thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. So, Matt, this decision by the president comes right after a report was released on Saturday by Hunter Biden's legal team criticizing the foundation of the investigation and warning of a harsh sentence. Here's part of what that report said. Quote, "There is no disputing that Trump has said his enemies list includes Hunter. The prospect that Trump will turn his vengeance on the special counsel of prosecutors if they fail to take a harder line against Hunter, no doubt exerts considerable pressure on them not to let up on Hunter." Clearly, the president was concerned his son could do serious prison time here.
That's right. And that is, I think, underlying a lot of why President Biden is doing this and doing this right now is the fear really of what Trump and a Trump Justice Department may do to Hunter Biden. As Carol had alluded to, this pardon is quite broad, covering a time period of more than a decade, really covering all possible aspects of the controversial business dealings that Hunter Biden had been engaged with and could be pursued by a Trump Justice Department. And so that really is the aspect of this timing here. There's certainly a personal element to this in the president choosing to pardon his son. And there's a political element to it. And it really has pitted the president's loyalty to his family against his pledge to stand up for institutions and the rule of law. And so the politics of it are quite tricky, even though there's a personal element of him trying to protect his son.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck, the broad nature of his pardon, which really wipes the slate clean, as Matt was just saying, for Hunter Biden from 2014 to yesterday. This covers everything Hunter Biden has ever been found guilty of, but also anything else that may have happened from 2014 on. How unusual is this?
Well, it is broad and sweeping. Pardon powers are plenary, as you know, Jose. And unusual, sure, in the sense that it's the president's son, and the president used his power as a father and he said as a president to clear him, to grant him clemency. I do want to point out one thing, one caveat. I was a federal prosecutor for a long time, and indeed, including as a criminal tax prosecutor for a period. And often when you have a federal tax crime, you often have a state tax crime, because in so many states, your federal income tax and your federal tax forms are made part of the state return. Presidents can only clear somebody for federal offenses. And so it's possible, Jose, at least theoretically, that Hunter Biden still faces state criminal tax liability. We'll see if states come after him. But as far as the federal cases are concerned, they're done.
And Ankush, you wrote just recently for Politico, quote, particularly in the wake of Trump's victory, Biden is on strong ground at a minimum to commute any sentence of imprisonment for his son Hunter before he leaves office. Not a pardon exactly, you wrote, but an important show of mercy. This, Ankush, is not only a show of mercy, because this is not a commutation or a pardon of just the specific things that Hunter Biden has been accused of and found guilty of, but this is anything and everything that could have been undue since 2014.
Yeah, it is quite broad. And I think everyone is pointing out correctly that a motivation here is almost certainly the appointments that Donald Trump has been announcing and what they indicate about the willingness of people like in senior positions in the incoming administration to try to target Hunter Biden. That clearly is motivating the sweep of the pardon, the assumption that maybe they would come after him again. The one thing I would say about this, though, as people are debating this and have been debating this, is that, it is highly unusual, as you've noted, that there would be a pardon going back 10 years. 10 years is basically the longest that most long-term criminal statutes have to apply, like bank fraud has a 10-year statute of limitations. But federal prosecutors have been investigating Hunter Biden for quite some time. Last summer, they also implied that they might be able to bring a criminal case against him for under FARA, and that was advanced as one of the reasons why the plea deal fell apart. We're now a year and a half after that. There's been no criminal FARA case. They've had years going back to the first Trump administration to go through Hunter Biden's financial and personal dealings and bring any criminal cases that were appropriate. I would be extremely surprised if there's any credible criminal case left on the table for this period. I understand that the pardon is sweeping and unusual, but I think it's important to put that context here.
And Matt, meanwhile, what do you think Trump's choice of Kash Patel to lead the FBI likely had any impact on Biden's decision to issue this pardon?
Well, I think that was a big motivation. I mean, I think that the president has been watching as President-elect Trump has made his appointments. They were struck initially by the Matt Gaetz appointment, which of course fell apart. But Trump is appointing people, the very people who would go after Hunter Biden. And so I think that is one of the main motivations behind the sweeping pardon that the president issued to his son. And that was along with the report that Hunter Biden's legal team had focused on over the weekend, was to point out the threats that Hunter Biden would face going forward. But he also faced, sentencing, the threat of prison time. And I think that was a big factor here as well. Over the next 2 weeks, he was scheduled to be sentenced in both California and Delaware. And there was the very real possibility that he would face jail time in that. And so, the president, part of the psychology of him and looking at his son, who did deal with a drug abuse issue where the president, was helpless almost in trying to help his son. And in this instance, he felt like he could do something to help him, and he did. But there's a lot of political implications to that decision.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck, and you were just saying that presidential pardons for family members aren't necessarily new. I mean, Clinton pardoned his brother, Trump pardoned Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner, who he just picked to be U.S. ambassador to France. What do you make of the timing, however, of this one?
Well, it makes sense to Matt's point. The sentencing proceedings in both Delaware and California were pending. They were imminent. And so rather than have the court go through that process, rather than have his son go through that process, the timing makes sense to me. The pardon doesn't make sense to me, but the timing of the pardon makes sense to me. By the way, if you look carefully at what Mr. Biden said, he said he was acting as a father and as a president. And as a father, I get it, right? He's taking care of his son. He loves his son. He doesn't want his son to go through any more heartache or face the possibility of prison. As a father, makes perfect sense. As a president, I think it was a mistake, Jose. I think it was a mistake to characterize the proceedings as tainted and political. I think it was a mistake to suggest that the prosecution was selective. That has a real meaning in our prosecutorial world. It was a mistake to suggest that there weren't valid charges. Remember that Hunter Biden was convicted by a jury in Delaware by proof beyond a reasonable doubt and unanimously, and that he admitted under oath in a California federal court that he had committed tax crimes. And so the notion that he hadn't committed crimes or that the process was tainted and political, I think it's deeply unfortunate for a president of the United States to say that. Mr. Biden, at least in this instance, sounds a good bit like Mr. Trump, in my view.